So most of the criticism of the Agile proponents at traditional project management is really focused on waterfall, and that criticism of the waterfall method does not apply to PMI and the PMBOK guide. Well, there's two other key areas I want to talk about too, where Agile proponents criticize traditional project management and in the same breath oftentimes criticize PMI and the PMBOK guide too. And those two areas are how we manage teams. They've really come up with, in their mind, a totally different way, different stakeholder roles, different roles for the project manager in the Agile model than is conceived of in traditional project management and the PMBOK guide. And similarly for change control and configuration management, they say this is going to be handled much, much differently in Agile than it is in the PMBOK guide. So let's look at these. So in the Agile model, again, we're working with projects where the requirements up front are not known, or they're not known in detail or very clearly. We're going to need to discover these requirements, just explore them. Therefore, we need very creative teams that are going to work closely with the customer to pull out and discover and explore these requirements. Therefore, we need probably senior team members, senior experience level team members who are quite empowered, very proficient at what they do, and we're going to provide a lot of freedom, we're going to provide a lot of trust for them to achieve in this very compressed schedule to create the backlog required in the sprint. So ideally for Agile, and all the different Agile models are typically talking about teams of 7 to 8 individuals who are quite empowered again. They're cross-functional individual, cross-chain people. We need people who are both designers, engineers, coders, testers, documenters. So we need everything all at once in one sprint. And they're going to be co-located. They're going to be dedicated to the project during the sprint. We can't have them multitasking and working on a number of other things and still be able to achieve our goals in this really tight time frame. So we need that. And we're going to provide them, again, a lot of freedom, a lot of trust. Once the product owner has identified, or the product owner team has identified the backlog for the sprint, we're going to turn that over to the team and, again, give them a lot of freedom how to go best create that backlog in the prototype. So the team then is the one that's accountable during the sprint for the prototype, for the iteration, not the project manager. And the project manager's role in all of this, the Scrum Master's role in all of this, is to be more of a facilitator, to ensure that the team is not interfered with during the sprint, that other stakeholders, the senior manager, people aren't interfering with them. Adding new things into the backlog, that's a no-no, cannot do that. So the project manager, the Scrum Master, is running interference and is more of a facilitator. And it's the team, the project team in Scrum, in the Agile methodologies, that's accountable. Where in the PMI model, of course, it's always the project manager. So we've got one-stop shopping, we've got one point of contact. In the PMI model, the project manager is the one person that's always accountable for the deliverables or for the success of the project. But Agile is wrong. The proponents in Agile are wrong when they say that this runs totally counter to the PMI model. Their fiction, their assumption of the PMI model is that the only way the PMI model works is that we've got this kind of top-heavy, very directing, very autocratic project manager who's responsible for the project management plan and is then handing off or assigning, providing instructions from the project management plan to the project team members, and in kind of a top-heavy way is almost micromanaging the team members as they're executing against the plan. And again, the project manager's role is to be very directing. Well, that's not a correct view of the PMI model, of the PMBOK, of what it says at all. PMI is perfectly fine with project managers adopting many different management styles and many different roles for different times in the project, different applications, different cases. We must be very flexible, they would say. We wear a lot of different hats, and they are fine with sometimes, in some cases, where we are more of a coach, more of a facilitator, more of a supporting type project manager. Therefore, they would say this Agile model is just one possible model that could be used, fits into their framework just fine. So additionally, they love co-location. They think that's great. They mention that as a tool in develop project team in the knowledge area human resource management, and for the very same reasons that Agile is supporting it. So if the team is co-located all together in kind of a war room context, then we cut out all the inefficiencies that occur in many businesses where people are having to leave voicemail messages. There's a lot of phone tag. There's delays in receiving responses on email messages. Well, if we're all co-located, we've eliminated those delays. They also think it's going to improve team chemistry and communications because we're face to face. And as we all know from reading all the literature, a huge part of communications is body language. So some of the studies say 55% of communications is body language. So if we're all co-located, then the communications should work much more smoothly and be more effective and efficient. So PMI loves that. Empowering team members. Again, PMI would say they're not going to put a value judgment on this. They're not going to say it's the best way to go, but they're fine with empowering team members in certain contexts. And it fits fine with a lot of the materials that are often taught in PMP prep courses about theory Y management styles as opposed to theory X. So theory Y really fits with almost all of this philosophy that the Agile proponents are describing. In theory Y, so this is McGregor's theory Y, we start with the premise, we start with the belief that people do like their work, do want to do a good job, and if we provide them the freedom, we provide them the right tools, we trust in them, they will achieve our goals, they will achieve what we're looking for. And it's not a theory X. The old-fashioned, kind of old school, more medieval perhaps, management style was theory X, where the belief, you start with the belief that people don't like their work, don't like their job, then you're going to believe that they're going to be lazy and uninspired, no initiative, they're going to be taking steps all the time to take long breaks and get out of as much work as they can. So in the theory Y model, which PMI definitely agrees is applicable and works in many contexts, they would say this fits fine. So the Agile model fits fine with the PMBOK guide. On the one thing where they go different ways, PMI would say that, again, the PM, the project manager, is the single point of accountability for the project, not the project team. Okay, let's talk about change management, change control systems, and configuration management. There seems to be a pretty wide gulf between the view of the need for this by the authors of Agile books and articles and the PMBOK guide, the PMI view. The PMI view is that we do need to plan for change in a fairly formal way. We should have a change management plan and a configuration management plan that defines roles and responsibilities. All change requests should be submitted in writing. We should define what documents should be filled out. We should define the flow chart governing the processing of these change requests. So how are they going to be evaluated and analyzed, alternatives analysis and impact analysis, what are the different approval levels needed, and then ensure if a change request does get approved that we do all the required updating to the many different parts of the project management plan and baselines that could be affected by the change request. So the authors of most books in Agile and articles on this find this quite distasteful, and they say, wow, all this formality, all this bureaucracy, this is going to end up repressing change, and we're all about change, so we don't want to enforce such formal systems. We don't want to prescribe to the teams all this documentation and processes and formality that need to be followed, it's going to end up repressing change. And we want to actually encourage change. We're trying to be creative. We're trying to discover. We're trying to explore what the customer's requirements are really in a sprint. So we don't really want to go with all this formality. And also, by the way, PMI, what you're really trying to do with all this formal change control systems and configuration management systems, you're really trying to enforce the original baselines. You're trying to say to us that we need to plan things in depth, upfront, in enough detail so that we won't need change. In other words, define the recipe for the perfect cake up front so we won't need change. So that's their view of the PMI model. But that is not really an accurate representation of what PMI is saying at all. PMI is not saying that we need to enforce the original baselines and repress change. PMI understands it is a fact of life, it is going to occur. Just plan for it. Yes, do document it. Yes, do define roles and responsibilities. Yes, do evaluate changes to see what their impact will be across the board. But they're allowing that the baselines will evolve, will change over time. They're not trying to enforce the original baselines. I think that's a misnomer. I think maybe perhaps some of the original books that we all knew and loved and used in preparing for the PMP, perhaps as I did 15 years ago, Kersner's book, some of these other things, they did say some things along those lines that we should plan things in depth up front, enough detail so that change isn't really needed. But that is not the more modern view, and PMI is not subscribing to that. So there isn't the conflict on this that many of the authors writing books on Agile say that there is. And they're misrepresenting the PMI view. So in summary, most of the apparent conflicts and disconnects between Agile and the PMI model are really an illusion. There really is no conflict on most of these major counts. PMI is not aligned with the waterfall method. The PMBOK guide is not promoting the waterfall method or sequential phase structure for projects. They are perfectly fine. They say in several different places, in several different forms, they say that oftentimes we'll need to do our projects using iterative phase structures. They're fine with prototyping as one of the key tools and techniques for collecting requirements, so they're not aligned with that. Similarly, they are not with their formal change control and configuration management structures that they put together. Yes, they are doing that, but they're not putting this together as a way to repress change. They are not saying we need to enforce the original baselines. The three main baselines, the scope baseline, schedule baseline, cost baseline, they understand that these baselines will evolve over time, that all baselines are the previous baseline plus approved changes, and changes are happening from beginning to end. So baselines are going to evolve. And again, they have no problem with very empowered project teams. They have no problem with the project manager at some times taking on more of a facilitating role, more of a role of a coach. So they just say this is, again, one possibility, one way that this could fit in with the overall model of the PMBOK guide.